Morning. Thank you, Sam, or good afternoon in Geneva. So here we are, and in a fundamental sense, we shouldn't be here. The scale and the nature of what has happened in Afghanistan demanded clear, unequivocal, unambiguous action to preserve and protect human rights. And yet here we are again. We find ourselves on the margins of yet another Human Rights Council session, pressing for minimums in a context where maximums should be on the table. So what do we know since the signing of that agreement between the United States and the, quote, Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, which is not recognized by the United States as a state and known as the Taliban? And there's a mouthful that tells you a lot about what's on the table. Recognized by the Security Council in Resolution 2513 in 2020. Well, we know a lot, and we know it from those who've been on the ground, including Shahrazad. As she and others have told us in the preceding months through August, through July, and before that, Afghanistan's daily staple was marked by a record targeting of civilians and civilian casualties, including record deaths among women and children. I joined with other special rapporteurs a statement presented to the Human Rights Council at its special session, noting, quote, the gravity of civilian harms that have been caused by that latest military offensive and the well-founded fear of the Afghan people rooted in an onslaught of fighting during this offensive, as well as over the course of the last 18 months, all of which requires accountability. As we understand, and we think we need to understand, the broader threat posed by the Taliban, it's worth going back to June 2021, when the UN monitoring team, which reports to the Sanctions Committee and the Security Council, was clear-eyed and unambiguous in its statements to the Security Council. It said, Al-Qaeda is present in at least 15 Afghan provinces, and according to member states, Al-Qaeda maintains contact with the Taliban, but has maintained a position of laying low so as not to jeopardize the Taliban's diplomatic position. The team that reports on security to the Security Council also reported that it's impossible to ascertain with confidence that the Taliban will live up to its commitments to suppress any future international threat coming from Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda and like-minded militants continue to celebrate the developments in Afghanistan as not simply a victory for the Taliban's cause, but for global radicalism. So we know that, and we also know what women have told us and have been telling us for months, that their own lives and the lives of their girls are being irreparably damaged by the emergence of this power. We also know it factually, as Ken has told us. On September 8th, 2021, the Taliban declared an Islamic Emirate and appointed a transitional government composed of 10 men, at least 8 of whom are designated individuals under the 1988 sanctions regime, and made absolutely no move towards an inclusive or negotiated intra-Afghan dialogue or settlement. We also know that the Ministry of Women's Affairs have been dissolved. So what does this knowledge demand of us? What does it demand of states? It demands a robust, resourced, fact-finding body as a minimum. This is what is required. And why not a special rapporteur? Well, not to decry my own métier and not to undermine the extraordinary work that many of my colleagues do. This is not fit for purpose. The role we have is not fit for this purpose, for this need. It is an insider's secret known to all that we have full-time jobs, that we are so meagerly resourced that we function as beggars on our universities, NGOs, and parasites on some meager external funding, so we can simply try to keep up with the work that we are mandated to do. And this is the response to the compelling, overwhelming need that is manifest in Afghanistan. When you appoint, if states are to appoint an SR to this moment, to this evidence need, what you are saying is, we're not serious about this need. We are not listening to you. You want to placate us because we're making a little bit of noise and that makes you uncomfortable. So you feel like you have to do something. But you're telling us as clearly as you can that the kind of monitoring, oversight, preservation of evidence, benchmarking of systematic patterns and forms of human rights violations are not your concern because you're not going to put the resources in place to evidence them. So this tells us that the kinds of pressure and the kinds of demands that we have will simply not be met by the establishment of a special rapporteur, no matter how well qualified, no matter how desirous to do good. Let me just say beyond that a couple of other things which are clearly on the table and integrate with and are relevant to fact-finding body, and that is sanctions. The United Nations and member states find themselves in what we might call somewhat of a pickle, because we are looking at the renewal of the 1988 sanctions regime scheduled for December 21. And with the Taliban's control over the country and the named individuals sitting in government, we have an obvious problem. And let me suggest what we need to do from a human rights perspective really briefly. The first is that sanctions system is deeply dysfunctional and not human rights compliant and is in need of massive overhaul to preserve the individual rights of those who are placed upon it. We know that not least because the ombudsman for the sanctions system resigned this summer after years of telling us that the system was rule of law deficient. The second thing we know about those sanctions regime is that they have the capacity to operate upon those who have committed serious violations of international law, and they should be used in that way. The third is that we need sustained engagement of that sanctions monitoring oversight with civil society, including Afghan civil society, so that they are directly informed by those who experience the harms on the ground. And finally, we need the UN itself to understand that unless we address the sanctions issue, we will continue to plow towards a massive humanitarian disaster in Afghanistan that will not be remedied as we hang ring both on reforming sanctions so that there are humanitarian exemptions, and as we need to set up a human rights monitoring mechanism, which is one of the things that will support an effective sanctions oversight system. These things are all connected. And so I close by reminding us that when the Security Council spoke in June 2020, it said, any political settlement must protect the rights of all Afghans, including women, youth, and minorities, and respect the strong desire of Afghans to achieve durable peace and prosperity. Even in this moment, we have no right to abrogate the rights of Afghans to those fundamental human rights, and a fact-finding mission is the least of the problem.